We good, Brad? Great. Hey, I'm John. Some of you know me and some of you don't, so really quick. I'm the youth director here. I'm from Kansas City. That's all you need to know. So we are going to be reading through Psalm 104 in a minute. John Houchin is going to read it. But first, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read from Narnia. If you're a kid, you should have, or should, and if you're an adult, you need to reread it. I chain read them the first week of the year, and it has like utterly changed how I interact with creation as an adult to reread them. So this is going to be the creation story from Narnia. Lewis is a super good writer, so it's not just a big block of text. It's like narrative, conversation, plot advancement. So I've read this 3 times, so I have the authority now to like make my own authoritative edit. So here's, whoa, did you see that? That was incredible. All right, we're off to a good start, guys. So here's Lewis's take. Also, I'm sitting down because it's not the Bible. I'm not going to stand while I read this. Here we go. In the darkness, something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself. There were no words. There was hardly even a tune, but it was beyond comparison the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. Then 2 wonders happened at the same moment. One was that the voice was suddenly joined by other voices, more voices than you could possibly count. They were in harmony with it, but far higher up the scale, cold, tingling, silvery voices. The second wonder was that the blackness overhead all at once was blazing with stars. They didn't come out gently one by one as they do on a summer evening. One moment there had been nothing but darkness. Next moment, 1,000 points of light leaped out. Single stars, constellations, and planets, brighter and bigger than any in our world. There were no clouds. The new stars and the new voices began at exactly the same time. If you had seen and heard it as Diggory did, you would have felt quite certain that it was the stars themselves which were singing, and that it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them appear and made them sing. Far away and down near the horizon, the sky began to turn gray. A light wind, very fresh, began to stir. The sky, in that one place, grew slowly and steadily paler. You could see shapes of hills standing up dark against it. All the time, the voice went on singing. The eastern sky changed from white to pink and from pink to gold. The voice rose and rose till all the air was shaking with it. And just as it swelled to the mightiest and most glorious sound it had yet produced, the sun arose. Diggory had never seen such a sun. The sun above the ruins of Charn had looked older than ours. This looked younger. You could imagine that. It laughed for joy as it came up. And as its beam shot across the land, the travelers could see for the first time what sort of place they were in. It was a valley through which a broad, swift river wound its way, flowing eastward toward the sun. Southward there were mountains. Northward there were lower hills. But it was a valley of mere earth, rock, and water. There was not a tree, not a bush, not a blade of grass to be seen. The earth was of many colors. They were fresh, hot, and vivid. They made you feel excited until you saw the singer himself, and then you forgot everything else. It was a lion, huge, shaggy, and bright. It stood facing the risen sun. Its mouth was wide open in song, and it was about 300 yards away. This is the next chapter. That's what teachers do. The lion was pacing to and fro about that empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song by which he had called up the stars and the sun. A gentle rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool. It ran up the sides of the little hills like a wave. In a few minutes, it was creeping up the lower slopes of the distant mountains, making that young world every moment softer. It's a lot of text here. In a few minutes, Diggory came to the edge of the wood, and there he stopped. The lion was singing still, but now the song had once more changed. It was more like what we should call a tune, but it was also far wilder. It made you want to run and jump and climb. It made you want to shout. It made you want to rush at other people and either hug them or fight them. It made Diggory hot and red in the face. But what the song did to the 2 humans was nothing compared with what it was doing to the country. Can you imagine a stretch of grassy land bubbling like water in a pot? For that is really the best description of what was happening. In all directions, it was swelling into humps. They were of very different sizes, some no bigger than molehills, some as big as wheelbarrows, 2 the size of cottages, and the humps moved and swelled till they burst. And the crumbled earth poured out of them, and from each hump there came out an animal. The moles came out just as you might see a mole come out in England. The dogs came out, barking the moment their heads were free, and struggling as you've seen them do when they're getting through a narrow hole in a hedge. The stags were the queerest to watch, for of course the antlers came up a long time before the rest of them, so at first Diggory thought they were trees. The frogs, who all came up near the river, went straight into it, with a plop plop and a loud croaking. The panthers, leopards, and things of that sort sat down at once to wash the loose earth off of their hindquarters, and then stood up against the trees to sharpen their front claws. Showers of birds came out of the trees. Butterflies fluttered. Bees got to work on the flowers as if they hadn't a second to lose. But the greatest moment of all was when the biggest hump broke like a small earthquake, and out came the sloping back, the large, wise head, and the 4 baggy-trousered legs of an elephant. And now you could hardly hear the song of the lion. There was so much cawing, cooing, crowing, braying, neighing, baying, barking, lowing, bleating, and trumpeting. But though Diggory could no longer hear the lion, he could see it. It was so big and so bright that he could not take his eyes off of it. The other animals did not appear to be afraid of it. And now, for the first time, the lion was quite silent. He was going to and fro among the animals, and every now and then he would go up to 2 of them, always 2 at a time, and touch their noses with his. He would touch 2 beavers amongst all the beavers, 2 leopards amongst all the leopards, 1 stag and 1 deer among all the deer, and leave the rest. Some sorts of animals he passed over altogether, but the pairs which he had touched instantly left their own kinds and followed him. At last he stood still, and all the creatures whom he had touched came and stood in a wide circle around him. The others whom he had not touched began to wander away. Their noses faded gradually into the distance. The chosen beasts who remained were now utterly silent, all with their eyes fixed intently upon the lion. The cat-like ones gave an occasional twitch of the tail, but otherwise all were still. For the first time that day there was complete silence, except for the noise of running water. Diggory's heart beat wildly. He knew something very solemn was going to be done. The lion, whose eyes never blinked, stared at the animals as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare. And gradually a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs. Most put their heads on one side as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky which hid them, the stars sang again, a pure, cold, difficult music. Then there came a swift flash like fire, but it burnt no one, either from the sky or from the lion itself, and every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, "Oh man, it's so good." Okay. Narnia, Narnia, Narnia. Awake, love, think, speak. Be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters. Whew. I never cry. That's like a thing, a totally unhealthy thing about me, but that one always gets me. Okay, so that's like a really beautiful creation story, right? And I kind of grew up in a denomination where we didn't really address creation. We didn't talk about it. We didn't, which I know there's the other end where it's whoa, and let's debate it. So I just never really had that growing up. And as an adult has become this thing where it moves me. That's just what I'll say. And I think I have been made in a way that beauty is a thing that is really important to me, and this pursuit of beauty and this acknowledgement of beauty. And to be able to lean in creation and see the sort of cyclical, forth moving creation and beauty that God has put into place, and not in a I made earth, hands off, but in a I made earth, hands on. I'm remaking. I'm making you new. I'm making it new. It's such an amazing thing. And then I think, I don't know about you guys, but the last couple of years have been weird. I think we can acknowledge that. I hope, right? And I think there were times in that when I just wasn't interested. The easy thing was to just be bleh. And then I think God has spoken to me through that time to say yeah, but look at the beauty. Look at what is happening around you, the things that I have put into motion from the beginning, from day one, right? And so I want us to kind of let go of whatever conceptions you have about creation, okay? I know that's hard to do for some people, but what I'll say is I don't think the psalmist was thinking about that. I don't think the psalmist was thinking like, are these literal days? Are these figurative days? Is this poetry? Is this history? Is it some, I don't think that's what's happening. I think they're in awe and they're responding to the creation that they know. And so I want us to do the same thing today. So we're going to be in Psalm 104. The title is God the Creator and Us in His Image, which I'm not going to explicitly ever talk about. I feel weird. I'm like a teacher by trade, I guess. I don't know if that's true, but I'll say it. And so one thing I just want you to hear at the beginning is like, a lot of times we'll like make up quotes and we'll say like really old smart people said them, like Plutarch, and they didn't. So Plutarch once said that like a student is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled, which I think is like a really good way to approach today. If I had 75 weeks, we could not scratch the surface of this psalm. So if at the end you're like, that was exciting, my fire is lit to go deeper, then that's great, which might mean that at just like 9:35 I just stopped talking and we're in the middle, or it might mean we finish, I don't know. We'll find out. But John Houchin's gonna come up here and take this microphone, and he's gonna read Psalm 104. You should read along with him. You wanna come up here? I got the glory. Okay.
My soul, bless the Lord. Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with majesty and splendor. He wraps himself in light as if it were a robe, spreading out the sky like canopy, laying the beams of his palace on the waters above, making the clouds his chariot, walking on the wings of the wind, and making the winds his messengers, flames of fire his servants. He established the earth on its foundations. It will never be shaken. You covered it with deep as if it were a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At your rebuke, the water fled. At the sound of your thunder, they hurried away. Mountains rose and valleys sank to the place you established before them. You set a boundary they cannot cross. They will never cover the earth again. He causes the springs to gush into the valleys. They flow between the mountains. They supply water for every wild beast. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. The birds of the sky live beside the springs. They make their voices heard among the foliage. He waters the mountains from his palace. The earth is satisfied by the fruit of your labor. He causes grass to grow for the livestock and provides crops for man to cultivate, producing food from the earth, wine that makes human hearts glad, making his face shine with oil and bread that sustains human hearts. The trees of the Lord flourish, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. There are birds, there the birds make their nests, storks make their homes in the pine trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The cliffs are a refuge for hyraxes. He made the moon to mark the festivals. The sun knows when to set. You bring darkness and it becomes night when all the forest animals stir. The young lions roar for their prey and seek their food from God. The sun rises. They go back and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until evening. How countless are your works, Lord. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea, vast and wide, teeming with creatures beyond number. Living things, both large and small. There are ships, there the ships move about, and Leviathan, which you formed to play there. All of them wait for you to give them their food at the right time. When you give it to them, they gather it. When you open your hand, they are satisfied with good things. When you hide your face, they are terrified. When you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. When you send your breath, they are created, and you renew the surface of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. He looks at the earth, and it trembles. He touches the mountains, and they pour out smoke. I will sing to the Lord all my life. I will sing praise to my God while I live. May my meditation be pleasing to him. I will rejoice in the Lord. May sinners vanish from the earth, and wicked people be no more. My soul, bless the Lord. Hallelujah.
Thanks, John. I'm going to stand now. Great. Solid. Okay, so really quick, we're going to look at verse 1, and then we're going to pause, and then we're going to talk about it for a second, and then we're going to pause, and then we're going to get into everything else. So really quick, just on your own, read verse 1. My soul bless the Lord. The ESV and a bunch of other translations, and Matt Redman, would translate this as bless the Lord, oh my soul. That was a Christian knees joke. It was good, I promise. So this is just like we're getting in this mind space, okay? That the psalmist, who is probably David, but we don't know that, is like putting himself into this place that like, for me to engage in creation, it would be insulting for me to not prepare my soul. So we're going to look at that. Take a minute and listen to this Charles Spurgeon quote, and then I just want you to take a second and like get your mind in a place to think about engaging in the beauty of creation. This is from Charles Spurgeon's commentary on this verse. True praise begins at home. It is idle to stir up others to praise if we are ungratefully silent ourselves. We should call upon our inmost hearts to awake and bestir themselves, for we are apt to be sluggish. And if we are, so when called upon to bless God, we shall have great cause to be ashamed. When we magnify the Lord, let us do it heartily. Our best is far beneath his worthiness. Let us not dishonor him by rendering to him half-hearted worship. So take a second, prepare yourself that you not be half-hearted in this. At the same time, you are going to need some paper. I'm going to ask you to draw. So there are some back there and some pins. If you don't have that, you could use this time to do that also. 1 minute. Go. All right, so while we're doing that, just a couple notes. I just want you to, from the beginning, take note that the psalmist is drawing our attention that God is great, not the creation, that the creation is beautiful and it is subservient to God. So just, you can read this like our lenses taint things, where it's like, oh, he's like, this is a worship the moon situation. That's not what's happening. Just be aware of that. And then some note on notes. Frank Zappa, you're really familiar with Frank Zappa, right? He once said, like, this sort of thing, like writing about art is like dancing about architecture, which means you can't do it. So we're going to be talking about beauty. There's going to be a bunch of stuff up here. If all you're doing is that, I think we like missed the point of beauty. So if it's big and life-changing, jot it down. And if it's not, just store it. So you don't have to be frantic about your notes. Deal? Great. Who was that? Thanks, Guy. Okay, so really quick, background info. This is probably David. We don't know that, but Psalm 103 starts and ends with the same two lines as 104, and 103 is attributed to David. So we get that. The tone of this is like very high and lofty because what the psalmist is talking about is high and lofty. Like it balls out as poetry goes. This is a quote from Matthew Henry. This noble poem is thought to be very competent. That was terrible. This noble poem is thought by very competent judges greatly to excel, not only for piety and devotion, that is past dispute, but for flight of fancy, brightness of ideas, surprising turns, and all the beauties and ornaments of expression, the Greek and Latin poets upon any subject of this nature. So that's Matthew Henry saying, like, the Latin and Greek poets, they had nothing on this as poetry. A little bit of that is lost because we're in English, not in Hebrew, and I was going to play it for you. I found this like sweet recording, but I don't have time. So, well, I do have time because we're covering material, or we're uncovering material, but we're not going to get to it. This psalm, this is my own opinion, is not only a view of the current condition of earth, the psalmist's current condition of earth, but a look at the moment of creation, creation as it now stands, the forward-moving cycle and beauty of creation, and the future yet to come, all in one coherent and beautifully written poem. Okay, so that's where we're at mentally. That's a lot of an introduction, and we're not even done with the introduction. There's three basic structures that this psalm is broken up into. I think we have slides. The first one is just sort of a basic structural outline, which will be up there, which is the splendor of his majesty in the upper world. Great. Creation of the sea and the dry land. You're picking up on these things we know as creation. The provision he makes for the maintenance of all creatures according to their nature. The regular course of the sun and the moon. The furniture of the sea, which is like a sweet phrase I'm going to start using. God's sovereign power over all the creatures. A pleasant and firm resolution to continue praising God, with which we should heartily join in singing this psalm. So that is like a generally accepted outline, not my idea. Then there are two other sort of approaches to which this psalm breaks down more poetically. The first is that it's split into two halves, sort of just like creation, with intro and outro. So the first being God in his splendor in the palace above in verses 1 through 4. Great. Then God orders creation, right? So if we look at the first half of creation, it's sort of taking these things and like getting them in the right places. That's kind of how this psalm works. Then he's filling the land and sea and air with these creatures. That's the next chunk. And then he sustains and continues creation. And then there's sort of this like rest, this implicit rest thing that's not directly mentioned, but is really cool. And then the other way you can read it is just the psalmist is literally referencing the like 7 days. Day 1, light, day and night, which you'll see in verse 1. Day 2, the atmosphere and the firmament, which is a weird word we don't use, but we're going to today. Day 3, the dry ground and plants. 4, sun, moon, and stars. 5, birds and sea creatures. 6, land animals, climaxing with humans, which get mentioned a little bit, but the human is the psalmist. And then 7, the Sabbath. So we've kind of stirred our hearts, and we have found our basic structure. So we're going to go back to verse 1. So look there. Even as like a modern reader, I think we're able to kind of quickly pick up on there being some sort of like language of the monarchy. Would we agree? Like look in the first few verses, do we see that? It doesn't say bathrobe. I don't wear a bathrobe. I don't wear any robe. But when we think of like robes, we get into that mindset of that. When we think about light in view of the Old Testament, that's sort of the description we think of when we see God, right? He's like bright and shining. Don't look at his face. All of these connections of light, okay? It says he's clothed in majesty and splendor, and the way he is clothed is in light. So we've already got our allusion back to Genesis 1:3, when God first made light. That was great. We've got 1 John, right? It says God is light, okay? So that's like a later thing, which is like my favorite thing about the Bible, is like all of this coming together. It's so amazing. James 1:17, God is the Father of lights. So in youth, we talked about this. This is the only time, right, Jackson? Yeah. It's the only time in the Bible that God's described as the Father of light, which could be this literal, he made light, but also like the Father of light. Like the idea, the concept, the presence of light is what God is. That's bonkers. I'm sure Caleb could like explain it real good. And then God dwells in light. We can see that in 1 Timothy. So there's this like immediate like pay attention, right? Not only is God light, but he's dressed in light, right? We've got this like kind of cool thing as humans that like our clothing conceals, right? That's why I'm wearing this. It conceals who I am because that's not appropriate, but it also tells us something about who we are, right? We can look at a person, and for good or bad, we're going to make an assumption, right? But also for good or bad, hopefully, if royalty walked in, there would be something about their clothing that would probably indicate that, right? If you've been like really in on the queen and now king, there is a shift in like what those people wear, right? I don't have a crown yet, but I could. Next time I will. If light itself is but his garment and veil, what must be the blazing splendor of his own essential being? We are lost in astonishment and dare not pry into the mystery, lest we be blinded by its insufferable glory. That's Spurgeon again, like killing it, Spurgeon style, which is amazing. And then we move straight into more monarchy stuff, and we talk about the palace, right? So this is crazy. And then we got to pump the brakes, all right? So what I want you to do really quick, get that piece of paper out. And I'm going to ask you to do a thing. And I had this policy as a teacher. I would never ask a kid to do something that I wouldn't do. So I'm going to ask you to draw, and I actually haven't practiced this at all. So I'm going to do it on the fly too. So what I want you to do right now is on one side of that paper, draw what your understanding of the cosmos, or cosmos as smart people say, is. So like, what's Earth look like, and what's the stuff around it? Go. It's not a trick question. You can't be wrong, because even if you're wrong, that's what you understand. So if you're a flat earther, today's your day. All right, so theoretically, even if you're a flat earther, you probably drew a circle. So now put like some land on there, like make it look like Earth, and then put like, where's the sun in relation to that? Which I realize I didn't tell you beforehand, so scale is out the window. Where's the moon? Where are the stars? And then I'm going to teacher you. Give me eye contact when you're done so I know, so I can paste this correctly. All right, so now we're going to get into the metaphysical, the weird. Add heaven to your understanding. Okay, so draw heaven. Where is it? And this is not it is a trap, but it's not a trick. And you can make the next logical conclusion, I think. Now put God on your cosmos. Hopefully he's in heaven, but also a super trick question. He's everywhere. Okay, and now last one. Where's hell, the underworld? Where do people go when they die? Draw that on your map. And then you've got people around you, so like show them to each other. Compare. See what you got in common. See what you didn't. Okay, I drew this really badly on a wobbly thing, but you probably drew something like Earth in the middle as a sphere, and then the sun and the moon are like out in space with the stars, right? And like none of us have an actual conception of how far those things are apart. It's wild. And then you probably in some form made heaven up and hell down, which is really hard because I didn't tell you at the beginning to leave room inside of Earth, which is where we like to imagine it, right? Okay, flip the paper over. Read verses 3 through 9, and I want you to attempt to draw what the psalmist is describing. And don't take a super long time because it's wild. One minute. Verses 3 to 9. Draw what you think it is describing. All right, wrap up, even if you're not done, because you're never done, as I repeatedly told my students for the last 11 years. Okay, I think we can like pretty quickly, as we're reading, even as like a novice to Psalm 104, realize that the psalmist is coming from this like different worldview of like what space, not like alien space, space, how it operates. So really quickly, I'm going to give you sort of like the ancient biblical view of cosmology to the best of my ability, which is really hard to do because, spoiler alert, they were flat earthers. So it's really hard to draw. But I'm going to draw this like circle, all right? So this is Earth. And if you see any depictions of the time, regardless of culture, it's sort of this flat disk, just like we would draw Earth, but they see it as this like flat disk, which is kind of wild, but kind of not. I can believe it, right? And then there might be some mountains over here. Sorry about the microphone, like that. And we're kind of describing that. Those will often be called the pillars of the earth. If you hear text, biblical or not, talking about the pillars of the earth, that is this thing. Why do we need pillars of the earth? Well, we've got two sets, but this set below we need because what's the earth possibly standing on? Well, it's like standing on these pillars that we're not really concerned about what they're standing on. They just are, you know? Which isn't to say people weren't having those thoughts, right? But it wasn't of their concern, right? If you've ever heard there's this like story about a guy talking to a woman about Earth, and she describes Earth as being on the back of a turtle, also a John Green novel you may have read. And then the guy says, well, what's below that turtle? And she says, a turtle. And he says, well, what's below that turtle? And she says, a turtle. And then he says, what? And she goes, let me stop you there. It's turtles all the way down, right? There's no conception of what these go on. It doesn't matter. If we even look at Job, which I think is like this amazing thing, which Mitch will be telling you about in the next Equip plug, Job describes the earth as unshakable and built upon foundations, but hung on nothing, which is actually this like remarkably prescient view of the earth. It is to some degree unshakable and hung on nothing. It's pretty crazy. So we've got these pillars, right? So we've got these pillars, and then on those pillars, this is where it gets wild. Okay, we have an actual physical, you could touch it and not penetrate it, dome, canopy, in verse 9, that is what we would see as the sky. Okay, wild. There's a little hole up here, but that doesn't matter too much in our thing. Okay, out here, there's just this ocean of chaos. Okay, so in the ancient understanding, the further you get out from the temple, you're progressively getting to chaos. Okay, so we've got the temple, and then we get to the like city, and then the edge of the city, it's a little more chaotic, and then the desert, right? The desert or the seas, both were like, that's Japanese for don't do it. Both like no-fly zones, right? The ocean is chaos in Old Testament writing. The desert is the same. If you look at the scapegoat story, right? When they take the goat, they get one, and they're like, yay, right? And then they have the other one. And we would think like, we should kill it. That would be the thing. But they let it go into the desert because it's this understanding of like, we are releasing sin to the area from which it must have spawned, this like land of utter chaos. Okay? We also have the same idea that the farther we get from heaven, spoiler, it's up here, the worse it is. That's, wow, okay. So down here, which is as far as we can get, is Sheol, which we hear talked about all the time. And again, it's like where, you know, the underworld, where people go. But there's no access. We don't have to like worry about them coming up to the surface. It's not an accessible place. That's just where it is. It makes sense, okay? This is where it gets crazy, and for us. Above that firm canopy, the firmament, there's an ocean inside of this other thing. So all this water is here. Is this, it's crazy, right? So if you're looking at 3, it talks about God putting the beams upon the waters above, and we're like, what does that mean? Here's what it means. So this is where our idea of heaven comes from. So God built this little palace up here, where God is in his palace, above this ocean, which is above us. So we've got heaven 1, heaven 2, and heaven 3. The best heaven is the one where God is, and that's where his palace is. Out here is the bad ocean. And we've also got the same. We've got depths of chaos. crazy. Make sense? Okay, I missed a few things. The sun, the moon, and the stars are inside of this. Again, they're not accessible, but they're inside of that dome, and they kind of like go. And over here, we don't know. We don't know what happens to them. We just know the next day the sun comes back, right? It's crazy. They also would have been under the assumption that the moon itself was a source of light, which we're not. Okay, so now we're going to fly. You ready? This is crazy. Here we go. We're good. We did that. All right, verse 7, God's talking, well, the psalmist is talking about God spreading the water and the land, and he uses this term rebuke. I think it's like so beautiful, right? So we've got to have this Old Testament view of the cosmology. So he's rebuking this because the earth wasn't fit for human habitation. We don't have like land that's usable, right? And God rebukes the waters and they move, okay? Which sounds a little goofy, but this thing that's going to come through with the things that really touched me out of this psalm are this, that there is this like kind of Old Testament understanding where nature is described as intellectual, right? Like you'll see, it'll say like God addressed the water and it feared, and so it moved, or like it rebuked, right? I wouldn't rebuke like a fig tree. Jesus did, but I wouldn't, right? I wouldn't talk to mountains like in my current cosmology. But there's this like kind of Old Testament understanding, not that those things are intellectual, but that if they were, if the waters were intellectual beings, if mountains were intellectual beings, this is like right here, their only sane response to God's direction would be complete obedience. And I just think that is such a beautiful and poetic way to describe creation. We often fall into this like, well, of course, like gravity, right? The theory of gravity. So water is going to go down and it's going to go to the low points and it's going to whatever, which isn't untrue. That is mostly probably true, that gravity makes the water go to the low points. But what is also true and more beautiful and a better heart space for me is to understand that that water would fear God and would go to the low places even if gravity dictated that it not. If gravity said, you're not going there, and God was like, you are going there, that the only sane response for water would be to go there. Oh, that's so good, so applicable to my life. Do you agree? Yeah, okay. Water, we get all this like imagery from water. We've got that. If you look in like verse 10, 11, we make this shift in how water is talked about. And we also make this shift that we were talking about salt water, and now we're talking about fresh water, which mirrors creation, and is this like very cool thing. Because we've gone from chaos, the sea, right, the chaotic water, to water being life, which pours out into this metaphor that is throughout the Bible that I think we can all connect to, that what I need is this living water. And we get that change. We even see it in the springs, that they come forth. The springs, they like water the area, which makes it habitable for birds. It takes land that wasn't habitable and it makes it habitable, right? It takes a soul that isn't habitable and makes it habitable. It moves me, the Spirit moves me because of the living water in my life. I think that is amazing. It's beautiful. It makes crops possible, right? We think about creation and we think about like the wilds of creation. We don't think about wheat. We don't think about grapes necessarily. We don't think about olives. We don't think about those things. But in creation, God had the foresight to make cultivatable crops, which I think is this like amazing thing. My favorite band, I don't know if it's my favorite band, but a band I really like, Me Without You, which is like noisecore, so maybe don't get into it if you're conservative about music. They wrote this song called The King Beetle on the Coconut Estate. I think the words will be up here, maybe, I don't know. I told Brad it'd be a real wild ride. Yeah, so this is a song about beetles anthropomorphically representing humans on this coconut estate. And it really struck me, like this song came out when I was in college, but he fills up the ponds and he empties the clouds, holds without hands and speaks without sounds, provides us with the cow's waste and the coconuts to eat, giving one that nice salt taste and the other a sweet, sends the black carriage the day death shows its face, thinning our numbers with kindness and grace. And just as a flower and its fragrance are one, so must each of you and this Father become. Wow, okay? There's like no way, doesn't matter. There's like no way Psalm 104 is not in that. You can follow that thread. That God has seen it and has been benevolent enough to make food. There's no like scientific reason, Caleb, correct me if I'm wrong, that food has to taste good. We desire it more, but it doesn't have to be good. There's no reason, like we could be koalas. They like, not only do they only eat eucalyptus, they only desire eucalyptus. It's the only thing they want to eat. There's like no reason that that is not the world God could have made for us. But it's not. He made this world where we can take grapes and we can mash them up and we can make wine that makes men's hearts glad, as Psalm 104 says. That's amazing. He made olives, and we can smash them and we can make olive oil, and we could use it in ancient times to make our faces glow to reflect the glory of God. That's amazing. He made wheat and water and yeast, which is this insane thing, like that's just flying around us now and landing on things and fermenting them. That's crazy. But he made that, and we can make bread. And not only is it delicious, bread is the best, but it has provided the like material for the metaphors that have brought us all closer to Jesus, right? That's really hard to do with just eucalyptus. It's hard for God to be the eucalyptus and the eucalyptus and the eucalyptus, right? But to be the bread and the wine and the olive oil that lets me reflect his glory, that's incredible. And so benevolent of him. And also just whatever. Guys, you should enjoy food. I assume Curtis referenced a cookbook by an Anglican priest. Where's Curtis? I don't know where he is. I felt that could only be one book, which is Supper of the Lamb. Is that okay? Good. So I'm going to read a quote, which it's incredible. It's a top 10 book for me. I think it's sitting at 6 currently. I have my list somewhere. If you don't have a list of your 10 favorite books with you at all times, what are you doing? Okay. Listen to this. This is crazy. And I'm using other people's reflections of beauty because of that cycle. God didn't make creation and that's the end. We're like allowed to make beautiful things and say beautiful things as long as we understand that we will never show him anything as beautiful as he is. Here we go. For all its rooted loveliness, the world has no continuing city here. It is an outlandish place, a foreign home, a session in via to a better version of itself. And it is our glory to see it, and so to thirst until Jerusalem comes home at last. We were given appetites not to consume the world and forget it, but to taste its goodness and hunger to make it great. To be sure, food keeps us alive, but that is it's only its smallest and most temporary work. Its eternal purpose is to furnish our sensibilities against the day when we shall sit down at the heavenly banquet and see how gracious the Lord is. Nourishment is necessary only for a while. What we shall need forever is taste. Way to go. That was incredible. Okay, we're really low on time, so I'm going to skip to the part that I just was like mind blown. It's after halftime. My notes say halftime, but that's fine. Moon and the sun, this part. Okay, so we have to like take a look at this from ancient perspective. Every other civilization that the psalmist, the Israelites, whatever you want to describe them, would have interacted with, saw the sun and the moon as what? Gods, actual physical gods, or at the very least connected directly to deities, right? And so the psalmist is saying, you made the moon to what? I'm a teacher, you have to respond. What? Mark the calendar, mark the festivals, okay? So there's this flip, and it's so good. It's like such a punch in the gut to gods, right? So what the psalmist is saying is like, hey, everyone else, we're assuming you're all Hittites, okay? Hey guys, you know that thing, that God that you worship as a God? Not only is it not a God, but it is in service to the actual God. That's big. That's like a real like poke in the ribs. That's level 1. Level 2, it says it's to mark the festivals, okay? So now we're not Hittites, we're ancient Jews. What are the festivals for? Worship, someone say it? Yeah? All of the festivals that the calendars marked for the Jews were moments to stop and reflect on God and his glory and what he had done for them. So from the creation, God was so good to us that not only did he make the moon and it's beautiful, he made it as this thing that perpetually, every day it's going to do this, and every day the sun's going to come up. And if we count them, and we count when they go full, right, which has had to be this crazy thing a long time ago. You're like, the moon, it's going woo, woo, and then like, when it's like full, it's like, what a sweet day. If we count those full moons, it's going to remind us to look upon the glory of God. God didn't have to do that. Like, there didn't have to be a reminder. That's good. That's good. God is good. Okay. I'm just going to stop there. If you look at the last, end of it, we're going to call that the moment of rest for the psalmist, okay? It's his chance to look at creation and rest in it, just like God did, okay? And so I'm going to give you just a couple minutes. I want you to look at your actual world, not what the psalmist says, because it's beautiful, but what have you seen? What beauty have you experienced in creation? And that might be a hike, and that might not be. That might be a meal. That might be a Caravaggio painting. I don't know what it is. It should be a Caravaggio painting. Talk to me afterwards if you want. But take a minute and reflect on the beauty that you have experienced through creation. And then in a couple minutes, I think Bryce is going to come up and lead us in worship. Thanks a lot, guys.